terrifying nightmare that your mind could conjure up, and then multiply it by about 73, because that is what Victoria Cilliers went through at the hands of the person who she thought she could trust more than anyone else. That's right. Her own husband tried to murder her by tampering with her parachute, sending her plummeting out of a plane with no way to protect herself. All she could do was watch the ground getting closer and closer, knowing what her fate was going to be. Except that wasn't the end of her story, because Victoria survived. Yep, you heard me correctly, which I think makes her just about the most badass woman possibly ever, and this is a story of her strength and survival, but it is also a very harrowing tale about red flags in relationships and what it might look like when someone may truly be dangerous. So, hello, I'm Anna, and this is episode 40 of the Crime Bistro podcast. Let's buckle up and get ready for this insane case. Right now, I have with me a breakfast blend coffee, always a classic, but grab your own coffee, caffeinated beverage, or emotional support water bottle, since we have quite the story to tell today. Let's get into the harrowing survival story of Victoria Cilliers. Victoria was born at Weston General Hospital in Edinburgh in 1975, and she described her childhood as, quote, reassuringly normal. She adored both of her parents. Her mother left her nursing job to stay with Victoria and her younger brother Christopher, while her father was working as an information systems developer. Family was super important to all of them, and they all sat down together to eat dinner every night during Victoria's childhood, which is just so sweet. Victoria's sense of adventure really did start to show itself very early on, and she fell in love with horseback riding, spending all of her weekends with the horses. At the age of 14, however, Victoria noticed a really big shift in the dynamic between her parents, and she would later say that as she noticed this tension start to rise, she also noticed that her own way of coping with it was tending to be very avoidant. So she would just pretend that everything was okay until she was forced to face the fact that it wasn't. This is a super common coping mechanism that I'm sure many of us can probably relate to, and this is something that would continue to affect Victoria throughout her life, so definitely keep it in mind as we talk through the rest of her story. The shift in this dynamic between her parents ended up being because her mother had been diagnosed with cancer, which is such devastating news, and this took a huge toll on their family, obviously. Victoria took up a bunch of new interests to try and distract her from the harsh reality of her mother's cancer treatments, and one of these new activities was actually joining the cadets at her school. Unfortunately, her mother's condition got significantly worse as time was going by, and as her mother was admitted to hospice, Victoria, her father, and brother Christopher would visit just as much as they could. It was during one of these visits that Victoria's mother asked her what she wanted to do with the rest of her life, and slightly caught off guard by the question because she was still pretty young at the time, Victoria just said that she thought being a physio sounded interesting. The September before Victoria turned 16, her mother unfortunately lost her battle with cancer, and Victoria was left to wonder what her life was going to look like without her mom. Ended up leaning on the answer that she had given her mother a few months before, studying physiotherapy. Victoria also continued to throw herself into all of these other hobbies that she had picked up, and as she was constantly looking for something to fill the time, she was more than thrilled to see a poster one day at school for a charity parachute jump. The very second that she jumped out of that little plane for the first time, Victoria completely fell in love with skydiving, feeling, quote, the spark of a new passion lighting up. Victoria would attend college in Glasgow, and she was studying to be a physio. She was also a part of the cadets there, but at the time she hadn't ever really even considered the idea of joining the army too seriously. But as Victoria was always up for a new adventure, she decided to attend a presentation for recruiting, and she was immediately taken by the opportunities that it could provide her, specifically in the form of travel. Both of her grandparents on her father's side had also served, and knowing that her father would be super proud and really supportive was also really important to Victoria. And this was also something that she saw as an escape. She kind of wanted to follow a path for her life that would provide a lot of excitement and also a lot of freedom. After completing her training, Victoria started her work as a physiotherapist, and she was first stationed at HMS Drake, which is a naval base in Plymouth, and then she was later moved to Aldershot, and she was also deployed to Kosovo, not really sure how to pronounce it. After returning from her tour, Victoria was promoted to captain, and she moved to the Defense Medical Rehabilitation Center. This was obviously a really difficult job, but at the same time it was much, much different than what she had experienced on deployment. So a coworker suggested that Victoria take some adventure courses to kind of fill that missing hole in her life for that excitement. And as fate would have it, one of the courses offered as these adventure courses was parachuting. And just as she had experienced in school, Victoria felt an incredible sense of euphoria on her first freefall jump, and she was just immediately hooked on the sport of skydiving. As she was training to be a freefall skydiver, she also accepted a proposal from her boyfriend at the time, whose name was Brett, and they had been together for 2 years before this proposal. But this immediately brought a lot of difficulty into Victoria's life because she felt that she was really struggling between these two commitments. One of them was to wedding planning, and then one of them was to her training and to skydiving. And it was a really hard decision for her to make, but she ultimately decided that she just could not give up the sport that she loved. About a year later, she became engaged to a man named Liam, and they got married in 2004 in a pretty small ceremony. However, after their marriage, both of their jobs really started to change, and they grew increasingly distant because of this. So to help them start to become closer again and rebuild the relationship, Victoria decided that she was going to leave the military, and she took a job as a physio for the Ministry of Defense, and this was in 2007. Unfortunately, though, it was around this time that Victoria's suspicions were piqued. And let me tell you, a woman's intuition is never wrong. She found out that Liam was having an affair and had been for nearly their entire marriage. So after spending a little bit of time trying to save the relationship, Victoria ultimately made the decision to leave, and she got a new job as a physiotherapist at a rehabilitation center and also was still continuing on with her parachute training. As she was working at this new job in this new rehabilitation center, she also worked towards becoming an instructor for accelerated free falling, which is just as terrifying as it sounds, trust me. And she did achieve this goal of becoming an instructor in 2009. So at that time, she was living near Lark Hill. It was her job as a physio in Lark Hill where she first met Emil Cilliers in the year 2009, the man who would become her second husband. He started to see her as a physio after a skiing accident, and they quickly became friends, and after a few months they really just started to develop this undeniable spark between them. She was really impressed by Emil's dedication to his career in the military, and also she was impressed by how hard he worked towards his physio so that he could get into this new training course that he was trying to be involved in. He also shared a lot of details of his life with her, including that he was separated from his wife and that he had 2 children with her. Eventually, Emil sent her a message on Facebook, and the rest is history. Victoria transferred him to another physio in their unit, and she accepted to go on a date with him. And it was really nice for Victoria to have somebody in her life who had the same adventurous spirit and this love for new experiences as well as for the outdoors that she did. And so because of this, their relationship did get serious very, very quickly. Emil was originally from Cape Town in South Africa, and he had come to the UK as an adult for some work experience, but he told Victoria that he had ended up staying because of his children with his ex-wife. However, even though he claims that he had stayed because of his children, he actually really condemned his ex-wife Carly in conversations with Victoria. He said that Carly was lazy and that he never really loved her and that she was really bad with money, and all of this stuff were things that Victoria would later say she probably should have recognized as a red flag, but in the moment she was just so taken by how lovely this new relationship was for her. Now, throughout the rest of this episode, notice all of the red flags that Victoria does recognize in hindsight, and keep this in mind. An abusive relationship can happen to anybody, and even the most charming of partners can have a really dark side. And it's never, ever, ever the victim's fault for staying in an abusive relationship, but there can be some really early signs before their behavior escalates to violence or to harm. So if any part of this episode does sound familiar, please seek assistance. Recognizing these red flags and these patterns of behavior from abusers can be life-saving, and that's why it's really important to talk about these cases when it comes to true crime. But going back to the relationship between Victoria and Emil, it was going very well, and they were starting to spend nearly every second together. And he actually told Victoria that he loved her after only a few weeks of dating, and they actually moved in together after only a few months, so this was moving very quickly. Now, this part of the story is crazy, but now that Emil and Victoria were living together, Emil wanted Victoria to meet the two children that he had had with his ex, Carly. So Victoria decided that she was going to meet Carly at a coffee shop to make sure that the two of them were comfortable with one another before Carly introduced her children to this new woman. And during this meeting, Carly dropped an absolute bombshell. Emil actually had not only the two children with Carly, but two other children with a former girlfriend from South Africa who now lived in the UK. So Victoria was obviously shocked, and she goes home and was like, excuse me, what is going on here? And Emil kind of explained it away by saying that he just wasn't a part of these children's lives. And so he also said that he was pretty scared to tell Victoria about this because he thought that she would leave her over it. He then also would go on to say that the mother of these two other children just didn't want Emil to be a part of their lives at all. And Victoria was a little bit worried about the fact that he had just walked away from these children, but we'll get into that a little bit more. So this former girlfriend, her name was Nicolene, and the worst part of all of this is that she had a child with Emil when she was very, very young. So she had one child, and then she got pregnant again, and at this point she was one child and pregnant, and she was 16 years old. So during the second pregnancy, Emil left for the UK and just abandoned his family with Nicolene. He just left without even telling her. It was Emil's mom who had to tell Nicolene that Emil was gone. And that's so sickening. I can't even wrap my brain around how that would make you feel as a 16-year-old. And Victoria is a very smart woman. So this was obviously really concerning, but also very confusing for her. And that's because she saw him with his younger children, and he seemed like such a good father to them. Not to mention, at this point in Emil and Victoria's relationship, the two of them were starting to talk about potentially having children together. So Victoria was really struggling to take a step back and see the full picture here with all of the potential warning signs. I mean, she really did love Emil so much, and at first he was very doting and caring, and other than the other two children, he kind of seemed perfect. He always had dinner and wine ready for her at home when she returned from work for the day. He was always writing love notes for her to find and helping to fix up her house. So from the way that he described it, I mean, it sounds like love bombing, but of course for somebody who had just come from a marriage where she had been cheated on, this would be a great change of pace. And her previous relationships really left Victoria feeling different and lonely. But this was such a big change for her to be in a loving relationship, or at least that's what it felt like, that she wasn't really willing to leave it. That all being said, however, the red flags just keep on flying, and about a month after Victoria and Emil moved in together, he revealed to her that he was in a very bad financial situation and that he was in a lot of debt, which he did blame Carly, his ex-wife, for not working and for spending all of their money from their joint account. I'm not super inclined to believe that it was Carly who was being irresponsible with their money at that point, considering that he was hiding it from Victoria, and he does have this pattern of saying horrible things about his exes. This debt in total was about £2,000, and so when it was paid off, Victoria and Emil decided that they were going to get a joint account for their household bills. And their relationship was just still progressing. So after a year, they flew back to South Africa to meet Emil's family, and they really did welcome Victoria with open arms. It was on this trip to visit his family that Emil proposed to Victoria, he actually took her to a cheetah sanctuary and put the engagement ring on the collar of one of the cheetahs, which is super interesting. It's just like a very unique way to propose. I don't even, how would you think of that? But obviously, Victoria gleefully accepted this proposal. She was completely in love with Emil, and she would later say that it just felt right, and she was really excited at looking into the future and especially about the idea of them having children together. The two of them decided to have their wedding in South Africa since Emil said that his parents probably wouldn't be able to afford to travel anywhere else, and Victoria's dad and her stepmom, he had gotten remarried after her mother died, happily agreed to attend this destination wedding. And right before the wedding, the stick turned blue. Well, not actually, but she actually took the test with the 2 lines, but either way, Victoria was pregnant and she was so beyond excited to become a mother, and she was 36 at this time. Now, I know that this is pretty late for your first pregnancy, but Victoria was in really good health, so it was entirely unexpected and completely devastating when just before a trip to London for Emil to play in a cricket match, Victoria miscarried. And get this, Emil talked her into still going to this cricket match while she was in horrible pain and actively miscarrying, since she had chosen not to be admitted to the hospital. And when Victoria said that she didn't want to be there, obviously, Emil protested by saying that, well, we are already here and the cricket team is counting on me to be there for them. So what did Emil do, you might ask? He gave Victoria the car keys. Yep. As she was miscarrying, bleeding, cramping, and in horrible pain, not to mention going through this unbelievably emotionally devastating event, Emil decided that his dumbass cricket match was more important. Disgusting. Not to mention, it's extremely disturbing how unbothered he seemed to have been by the loss of his child. But their relationship continued, and only 6 weeks before their official wedding date, this devastation from the miscarriage would be quelled when Victoria got an inkling and she took another pregnancy test. She was pregnant and she was so ecstatic, and Emil himself even seemed really, really excited for this. He even downloaded one of those apps on your phone that tracks the growth of the baby each day, like the ones that says, oh, today your baby's the size of an orange. So they did get married in South Africa, surrounded by family, and Victoria said that this marriage just felt like an absolute dream. Afterwards, though, her pregnancy was very difficult, and she did have several threatened miscarriages where she experienced a lot of bleeding multiple times. At one of her scheduled scans in April of 2012, at 36 weeks pregnant, Emil and Victoria found out that their baby had stopped growing. And since Victoria wanted to do everything possible to protect their child, she decided that the best course of action at that point was to be induced, and she gave birth that same day to a healthy baby girl who they named April. Around this time in their relationship, Victoria and Emil had also borrowed money from her brother Christopher in order to buy a house for their new family, and her primary source of income and primary source to support the family at that time was this skydiving instructing job that she had. She did become pregnant with her second child, and shortly after, Victoria got a call from a friend of hers whose 16-year-old daughter had babysat for Victoria's daughter, April. This call was extremely disturbing, and this friend told Victoria that Emil had been sending inappropriate texts to her teenage daughter. Emil's only defense to this when confronted was that his phone had been cloned. And on top of all of this, their financial situation just kept getting worse as Emil was spending all of their money away. And this is an aspect of abusive relationships that I don't honestly think is talked about enough. Financial abuse, especially in long-term relationships and marriages, is all too prevalent in our world today. Now, besides this horrific situation with this teenage girl, Victoria was also starting to notice signs that Emil might have been cheating on her. This included some photos of him cozying up to women that she had seen on social media, and she also found a profile of his on the dating app Tinder, all of which was making Victoria feel extremely alone, especially since she was very pregnant at this point, and all she wanted was to have the person who she fell in love with back. She barely recognized the man that he had become at this point, and she was just honestly feeling really trapped in this relationship. And Emil had started to become pretty controlling as well. An example would be any time that Victoria had friends over, he would sit and listen in on their conversations, even though he was never actually participating in these conversations. All of that being said, this relationship is definitely starting to deteriorate, but she did have their second child, a boy, who she named Ben in February of 2015, with almost zero input from Emil about their new baby's name. However, all of these red flags would conglomerate into one final incident, which, looking back in hindsight, is something that would give Victoria and all of us full body chills. In late March of 2015, Victoria had woken up one morning in their home with the two kids. At that point, Emil was at work, so Victoria goes downstairs to the kitchen to start her day when she noticed the smell of gas underneath the stove. Obviously, this is horrifying since she has the kids at home with her. So Victoria checks the gas valve and she thinks that everything seems normal, but she did notice there was a little bit of dried blood on the valve. So Victoria texted Emil to ask him if he had altered the lever for the gas pipe under the sink, saying that she had seen some dried blood on this lever and also remembering that he had recently cut his hand in the kitchen. His reply was, quote, "That is weird. Is the stove working?" To which Victoria said that she was not going to try and see if the stove was working because if there was a leak, the house could explode. So she did call a technician who arrived later on that day, and this person found that one of the bolts had come loose around the pipe. Now, I'm sure you can probably see where this is going, but Victoria herself remembered at that point that she had recently read a magazine article about a woman whose husband had tried to kill his wife by causing a gas leak in their home. She even texted Emil as a joke saying, quote, "Are you trying to kill me?" And he got extremely defensive about the whole thing. In hindsight now, of course, this is all terrifying since this was Emil's first attempt to kill his wife by causing this gas leak, but even worse and even more scary, their children were in the house. He had purposefully left the home the night prior, saying that he needed to work early, so he was going to sleep at the army barracks, and he had also spent a suspiciously long time in the kitchen before he left. However, this is something that's relatively common, right? Things malfunction and things leak around the houses. So Victoria did think about the incident for a little while afterwards, mostly wondering why Emil had been so defensive about it, but ultimately she decided to just brush it off. And honestly, how can you blame her? Most people wouldn't just jump to the conclusion that their husband was trying to kill them, even with a broken relationship like this one, and Emil had 4 other children from previous relationships and had never shown any kind of violence towards them. So why on earth would he intentionally cause a gas leak, knowing that his children, along with his wife, would be harmed? The relationship was still pretty volatile, and Emil's temper was only getting worse, but Victoria just felt trapped. Despite everything, she still really loved him, and she couldn't face the idea of being entirely on her own with 2 young children, as well as trying to go back to work full time. And as with most abusive relationships, there were also glimpses of Emil being a really good husband and a good father, especially in the week following this incident with the gas leak. But notwithstanding, it was definitely a shock when Emil called Victoria one day, saying that he had a surprise for her. He had booked them a couple's skydiving experience. Victoria was hopeful about the relationship because of this, and she thought that it actually might be a sign that he could be trying to reconcile things with them. So Victoria was elated, and the possibility of fixing things in their relationship and their family was really exciting, and it's just so sad that she had no idea what Emil was really planning for her. Before the skydiving experience, Emil claimed that he had some trouble finding childcare, so they decided that Victoria was going to be the one to jump, and then Emil would bring the children along with them, and Emil and the children would watch her from the ground. So on Saturday, April 4th of 2015, Victoria and Emil made their way to Wiltshire for this skydiving outing. Throughout the entire day, Emil was just acting like the perfect husband to Victoria, even offering to grab her parachute for her. With the parachute over his shoulder, Emil took it with him to the bathroom with their daughter April, while Victoria was out by the ticket counter watching their newborn Ben, where, unknown to Victoria, Emil was in the bathroom tampering with her parachute. They were all sitting together waiting as a family when an instructor came over to them saying that the weather just was not good enough for them to do a jump that day. So, making the decision that she would have to jump the next day, Emil suggested that she should just leave the parachute in her locker so that she didn't return it to the counter and would be able to use the same one the next day. So, on Easter Sunday, which was April 5th of 2015, Victoria, Emil, April, and Ben all hopped in the car and made their way back to the airfield in the morning. Because she had just given birth 5 weeks before, this was Victoria's first jump in a pretty long time, and she was nervous, but even worse, she could feel this really strange, just sinking feeling, something that could only be described as dread as the plane was taking off and reaching the height for their jump. Victoria herself said that this felt like a sixth sense telling her that she should not jump that day. Once given the go-ahead, Victoria jumped from the plane, free-falling through the air until she reached for the main parachute, pulled the cord, and the parachute did deploy. However, the lines were completely twisted to the point where she couldn't do anything about it. However, with her experience, Victoria did not panic. She knew just to reach for the reserve parachute for situations like this, so she cut away the main parachute, and to her absolute horror, the reserve parachute did not open. I genuinely cannot imagine the fear, the helplessness, the emotions that would be running through your head. I mean, this is like beyond the worst of nightmares. However, Victoria did say that during the fall, she wasn't even thinking about dying. She said that it just simply wasn't an option, that she had to see her kids again. She was spinning uncontrollably and unable to even see where she was in the air. So plummeting through space, picking up speed as gravity was taking hold of her, Victoria fell 3,000 feet, landing in a freshly plowed field, which was able to buffer her fall, but obviously from that height only very slightly. She landed at a velocity of about 60 miles per hour, which is horrifying. And obviously she sustained very, very serious injuries. She broke her spine, she completely shattered her pelvis, and she broke every rib on one side of her body and much more. But beyond all of that, Victoria was alive, which is nothing short of a miracle. And let me just mention that Emil knew Victoria was going to fall, and even so, he was watching her the entire time next to her children, who he had brought along on this outing because he is just an absolute worm of a human being. Victoria was taken to Southampton in a helicopter because the local hospital just didn't have a trauma unit that was equipped to handle the extreme extent of these injuries, and Victoria worked so hard on her recovery that she was discharged from the hospital after only 3 weeks, and she was so excited to see her children. But when she told Emil that she was going to be discharged, he claimed that he didn't have the time to make the drive to the trauma unit where she was being treated. So Victoria was officially discharged, and Emil didn't come to pick her up for 3 whole days. So now Victoria is at home recovering, and she was pretty surprised when she got a visit from the British Parachute Association, or the BPA, where they informed her that her accident was under investigation. Now, at first, this really confused Victoria because this was the first that she was hearing of the incident potentially being intentional. However, the investigation was now ongoing, and the BPA had figured out that her parachute had been missing pieces from it, pieces that looked like they had been intentionally removed. And employees at the airfield were kind of starting to notice that things didn't seem right about this either, so with Victoria's permission, this accident was reported to the police. And it wouldn't be long before a detective inspector from Wiltshire knocked on Victoria's door to tell her that Emil had been officially arrested for her attempted murder, a sentence that just hit Victoria like a ton of bricks. And I cannot blame her for having such trouble coming to terms with this. I mean, their relationship was rocky, but she had no reason to think he would try to murder her. And she still did know him as the person that she had met and fallen in love with, this charming army sergeant who was affectionate and caring, especially while also dealing with these major physical and emotional traumas from the accident. I can't imagine also trying to come to terms with the fact that the person you married was actually just evil. And according to the police, Emil was very emotionless when he was first arrested, and he was pretty open with the police during initial questioning. He told them all about an affair he had been having with a woman named Stephanie, and even more shockingly, he also revealed that he was having an affair with his ex-wife, Carly. So he had a wife, an affair partner, and a girlfriend. Ick. But he also did let some red flags slip, saying that he was in a lot of debt and that he had been using Victoria's money to help pay some of this debt off, which is quite the motive for attempted murder, for financial gain, and also to get out of this marriage that he clearly didn't want anymore. Emil also told the police that while they had been at the airfield for Victoria's jump on the 4th, he had gone to the bathroom with the parachute, and Victoria remembered that he was in there for quite a while. And this is when things really started to come together for the police, because they then theorized that it was while he was in the bathroom helping their daughter that Emil had tampered with the parachute. Even as she returned home after herself being questioned by the police, Victoria still just could not bring herself to even think of the possibility that Emil could have done this to her. With everything that she was going through, she simply did not have the emotional capacity to think that her husband could have tried to kill her. Emil was released on bail, God only knows how, but when police came to inform Victoria of this, they also revealed to Victoria that they had found concrete evidence of the affair with Stephanie in Emil's room at his army barracks. But even more shocking, police told Victoria some of the more disturbing details of Emil's affair. He had told Stephanie, this woman, that his marriage to Victoria was over, and he had also said that Ben wasn't even his son, that Victoria had cheated on him and gotten pregnant by another man. So just to lay out how evil and disturbing of a person Emil Cilliers truly is, he abandoned his wife during a miscarriage. He constantly left her to care for April, their daughter, alone, and then he claimed that his son wasn't even his own. And then on top of this, he was so disinterested towards his children, but he even tried to take their mother away from them. I mean, we cover some pretty scary people on this show, obviously, but this is just nauseating behavior. With these revelations, however, Victoria was emboldened to finally tell the police the truth about their rocky marriage, the cheating, the debts, and she actually spent hours down at the police station amending her original statement. And when police asked Victoria if anything else strange had happened recently, something did come to mind: the gas leak in their home the week before her accident, which she told them about before she was able to finally get home to her kids and rest. Things with the investigation were starting to really progress, and police did search Victoria's home, which my guess is that they were searching for evidence that he had tampered with that gas pipe, the gas lever. 4 months after his initial arrest, Emil was charged with a second count of attempted murder for the gas leak. And because the kids were in the home at the time of the leak, he was banned from seeing them, and he was additionally charged with reckless endangerment. Also, just as another side note, because of how impressive Victoria's strength and perseverance genuinely is, as all of these horrible things were happening and all of this awful stuff was coming to light, she was able to study for and secure her master's in sports physiotherapy in August of 2016 so that she could fully support her children. What an amazing person. It wouldn't be for 2 years after Victoria's fall that Emil's trial would officially begin in October of 2017, and Victoria was now having to face the horrible idea of serving as a witness herself. During the trial, the truth really came out about Emil's debts. He owed around £22,000 in 2015, and Emil obviously believed that if Victoria passed, he would receive £120,000 in life insurance money. Lawyers also discovered that Victoria had written Emil out of her own will when they bought their home because she didn't trust him financially and she wanted to have an asset to leave to her children just in case. Another piece of evidence that was particularly damaging was the chief instructor at the airfield, who testified that there wasn't any innocent explanation for there being parts of Victoria's parachute missing, and that the chief instructor had actually also asked the paramedics if they had maybe cut pieces of the chute out to try and help Victoria and give her medical attention, but the paramedics had only ever cut Victoria's goggle strap, so no one else at the scene had tampered with the parachute. A clip from Victoria's statements to police was also played in court, where it was revealed that Emil had taken a course on how to pack a reserve parachute, which meant that he would have known exactly how to tamper with hers. And another revelation came from Emil's text messages to Stephanie, his affair partner, where he told Stephanie that, quote, "From April onwards, I can do random and spontaneous. To be with you, I would do anything," with the important part of that statement being that he said specifically from April onwards, and Victoria's accident happened the first week in April. Throughout this trial, the news and the media were unfathomable for Victoria, who had to live with reporters standing outside of her home and looking through her windows with her children in the home. She got letters criticizing her behavior, and articles about Emil's infidelity especially were just everywhere. But after 6 weeks, Victoria was finally given some reprieve when the jury moved to their deliberations. Unfortunately, this wasn't actually a good thing. The spotlight turned away from Victoria at that point because the news started to focus more on the reports of bullying among jurors, which obviously is never good. 2 jurors were actually discharged as a result of these accusations, and both jurors provided medical notes to the judge stating that they were too stressed to continue because of the bullying that was happening. After 8 whole days of jury deliberation, the judge ordered a retrial when the jury determined that they were not going to be able to reach a verdict and were essentially hopelessly deadlocked. I'm not sure what the legal term for this is in the UK, but in the US this would be called a hung jury. This retrial was scheduled for April 11th of 2018, and Victoria unfortunately was put through very similar and very extensive questioning on the witness stand, similar, like I said, to the first trial. News was also reporting on an all-inclusive vacation that Emil had taken with his affair partner while Victoria was pregnant with Ben, since that was new information for the retrial. And all of this information coming out was also starting to make Victoria seriously question if Emil actually could have done this to her, since she was kind of recovering the mental capacity at that point, a couple of years later, to imagine that type of horror. Most of the same information was presented in this trial as the first, with some additional information presented about the specifics of Emil's impulsive spending, including a TV that he had bought for £3,500, which Victoria had no idea about. That sounds like a lot for a TV. I don't know. This new trial thankfully had no hiccups with the jurors as they were sent off to deliberate. And on May 24th of 2018, the BBC reported that Emil Cilliers had been found guilty on 2 counts of attempted murder unanimously, and he was also found guilty on the charge of reckless endangerment for the children. After 3 years, Emil and Victoria did reconnect after his trial and his conviction via a phone call from prison, and she also went to the prison to visit him in person, really just looking for closure after this entire ordeal. Unfortunately, Emil was very deflective in this conversation, and he essentially just denied any wrongdoing, even going so far as to cry, always the manipulator. Victoria did go to the sentencing, and it was at that point where she was able to hear everything that Emil had done read out in a very objective manner, that it really hit her just how much of a monster he was. And the judge agreed, saying that Emil was a danger to the public. Quote, "This was wicked offending of extreme gravity." Emil Cilliers was sentenced to a minimum of 18 years in prison, and for Victoria, this wasn't exactly a relief, but it would mark the end of her legal ordeals. Like I said, Victoria struggled for years to come to terms with her attempted murder, and I can't imagine how difficult it would have been to accept that somebody could do something so brutal and so terrifying like this in front of your children, not to mention someone who claimed that they loved you and who you loved so deeply. In a 2018 interview with Good Morning Britain, Victoria said that she had endured every emotion under the sun as she was grieving her relationship, continuing by saying, quote, "I still can't get to grips with the whole 'my husband tried to kill me' slant." When asked about the emotions that she had experienced since, Victoria said, quote, "I'm still pretty stunned. It's such a massive thing to accept that he might have wanted to kill me and harm the children. I love the husband I had. I'm grieving for that marriage." She had at that point come to terms with the fact that she was a victim of coercive control. But this woman, I can't even believe how brave she was, because in 2018, she went skydiving again at the London Parachute School's airfield. And she was terrified, saying, quote, "It took me right back to the last flight when I had that sixth sense that I should not be jumping, a premonition of something terrible about to happen with no notion of what it might be. When I landed, I felt the most incredible sense of relief and release." She was scared, but Victoria put a smile on her face and she faced her fears, returning to the thing that she had loved so much for so many years. And I don't know her, but I am so proud of her for taking back that control and for not allowing her worm of an ex-husband to have any more power or influence in her life. And I am happy to report that she is in a new relationship with a fellow skydiver named Simon Goodman, who she actually had known as a friend for about a decade, which made it a lot easier for her to trust him. Simon is amazing with her children, and the two of them allowed their relationship to develop slowly over the course of about 18 months, and it's just so great to hear that Victoria now gets to feel safe with someone who truly cares about her and only ever makes her feel comfortable. And wow, that is definitely one of the most scary, angering, and just pure evil stories that I've heard in a very long time. Emil Cilliers is a horrific person whose own selfish agenda took over and caused him to mistreat every single person in his life, even those who he claimed to love, and showing such complete indifference towards his own children. The way that he acts towards his own children is the most disturbing piece of all of this. It's important to listen to Victoria's entire story because it does demonstrate how abusive relationships can spiral over the years, and it especially shows how isolating an abusive partner can be. Emil made Victoria feel that she couldn't share their marital problems with any other person in her life, and that meant that he had full control over the relationship and at that point, over her. Thankfully, Victoria survived, but I cannot imagine the physical, emotional, and spiritual pain that she is left with from this relationship and from her attempted murder. The major takeaway here is that before an abuser's behavior escalates to violence or deadly behaviors, there will be signs and their character will start to change. So if you or anyone that you know is experiencing any type of abuse in a relationship, that might be financial, emotional, or physical, or if there are signs there, signs could be isolation from friends and family, control over your phone and your social life, intense mood changes, placing blame for any relationship issues. There are resources out there where you can get help, and all of those numbers will be in the description of this episode. If you think you might need help, please call. And that is the incredible survival story of Victoria Cilliers. She is such a strong person and such an amazing mother. It's so inspiring to think about and read her story. A lot of the information in this episode is from her own book, which is titled I Survived. I Married a Charming Man, Then He Tried to Kill Me. And I highly recommend checking that out if you do have the time. But if you've made it this far into the episode, thank you so much for your listening and for your time. I'm really grateful for this podcast and this little community. So again, thank you so much. And I hope to have everyone back next week for a new episode. That being said, that is all that I have for you today. So we're going to end this episode, as always, until next time.